House will come back to order. House will come back to order. We are coming back to order to do business. Clerk will ring the bell. House is back in order. The clerk will read the caption to a group of privilege resolutions.
Honoring life and memory of Dr. Paul L. Walker. Recognizing and commending Gilbert Young. Recognizing and commending Captain Thornell King. Recognizing the positive impact of African nations on the state of Georgia and acknowledging the importance of diplomatic, technological, and trade relations. Congratulating the Warner Robins High School football team for winning the Warner Robins City Championship, the Region 1 5A Championship, and the GHSA 5A State Championship. Recognizing March 7 through 13, 2021 is National Groundwater Awareness Week in Georgia. Commending the Georgia Craft Brewers Guild and recognizing March 6, 2021 as Georgia Beer Day. Recognizing and commending Ruby Foster. Recognizing and commending Captain Edward Holman Hightower upon his induction into the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. Congratulating the Kings Way Christian School boys basketball team for winning the 2021 GCAA State Championship. Commending and congratulating Sheriff J. Tyson Stevens. Recognizing and commending Judge Kathy Stevens Palmer on her outstanding public service. Recognizing and commending Dwight Eubanks. Congratulating and commending Yolanda Fredericks for receiving the 2021 Yellow Rose Nikki T. Randall Servant Leader Award. And commending and congratulating Brookhaven Police Chief Gary Yandura as Georgia's 2020-2021 Outstanding Police Chief of the Year. And for other purposes, that completes the reading of the privilege resolutions.
All right. Chair recognizes the majority leader for a resolution. Is there any objection to adopting the privilege resolutions? The chair hears none. The resolutions are adopted. Now the chair recognizes the majority leader for a resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, as is our tradition, we've had the state of the state with the governor. Now we will hear from Chief Justice Melton. He will be in the chamber for, I believe, will be his last presentation on the state of the judiciary. That will be next Tuesday, March 16th at 11 a.m. right here. So it should be exciting, as it always is, to hear about the judiciary and the state of the judiciary. They've had an interesting year, and we'll be glad to hear from Ms. Speaker. That's what the resolution does and a little more. So we thank you, and I'd ask for your favorable consideration.
On the resolution to set a date for the state of judiciary and to invite the Chief Justice and the Chief Judge and whoever else they're going to bring, is there objection? Is there objection? The chair hears none and the resolution is adopted. Clerk will read the caption to House Resolution 25.
House Resolution 25 by Representative Stevens and the 164th, a resolution compensating Mark Jason Jones and for other purposes. This resolution has been referred to the Committee on Appropriations. That committee recommends that this resolution be adopted.
Chair recognizes Representative Mallow to present the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, this is resolution number 2 in the series of the 3 gentlemen that were wrongfully convicted of murder. This resolution passed the House favorably last year, and I ask for your favorable consideration to pass this resolution this morning. If there are no questions, Mr. Speaker, I yield the will.
You had no questions. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the adoption of the resolution? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this resolution now be adopted? All those in favor of the adoption of the resolution will vote. Will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the adoption of House Resolution 25. The ayes are 149, the nays are 9. This resolution, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore adopted. Clerk will read the caption to House Resolution 26.
House Resolution 26 by Representative Stevens and the 164th, compensating Kenneth Eric Gardner. This resolution has been forwarded to the Committee on Appropriations. That committee recommends that this resolution be adopted.
Chair recognizes Representative Mallow to present the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues of the House, this is the last resolution for a trio that had been wrongfully convicted of murder. This resolution passed this House last session, and hopefully we can pass this last resolution for this other gentleman so they be compensated for the 25 years that they spent in prison wrongfully convicted of murder. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield the will if there are no questions.
There are no questions. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the adoption of the resolution? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this resolution now be adopted? All those in favor of the adoption of the resolution will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the passage of House Resolution 26. The ayes are 150, the nays are 12. This resolution, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Resolution 29.
House Resolution 29 by Representative Hughley of the 136, a resolution compensating Mr. Jakeith Benray Robinson Sr. This resolution having been assigned to the Committee on Appropriations, that committee recommends that this resolution be adopted.
Chair recognizes Representative Hughley to present the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I bring to your attention House Resolution 29 on behalf of Mr. Jakeith Robinson, who seeks compensation for a wrongful conviction. This measure was passed by this House last year as House Resolution 18, and it went the way of many other bills after COVID came into play. We depend on our justice system to keep us safe. It protects our families, our home, our businesses, and our communities. And in the pursuit of fairness, the justice system is governed by rules of procedure to protect us as citizens so that each of us are treated fairly in our judicial proceedings. When those rules are not followed, we all lose. Jakeith Robinson spent 20 years behind bars, and when he was released in 2014, the Court of Appeals decided that the trial court had erred by overruling the defendant's objection to the state's attempt to approve armed robbery via party to a crime theory because the issue was barred from relitigation under double jeopardy based on the acquittal of Mr. Robinson under the theory in the first trial, in which the jury determined that Robinson was not a party to the crimes. So basically, you have a gentleman who was the victim of double jeopardy, and then he filed his appeal, and that appeal was lost for some 10 years, and there was no explanation for why the case was never docketed. And so the appeals court reversed it, and in its reversal, it admonished everyone involved that we have to do better, and we have to make sure that everyone's rights are protected. With that, Mr. Speaker, if there are no questions, I'll yield the will and ask for everyone's favorable consideration for House Resolution 29.
You have a question if you care to yield.
I'll be happy to.
Chair recognizes Representative or Chairman Perkle to your right for a question.
Will the representative yield for a question?
I yield.
Is it not true that court testimony, which was never refuted, implicated the individual named in this compensation resolution as the getaway driver in the armored car robbery that killed 22-year Army veteran John Hamilton in 1995?
Actually, what happened is that there were no witnesses, there was no evidence against him. He was implicated, but in our system, we have to be proven guilty, and there was nothing to indicate that he was guilty of these crimes.
Will the lady yield for one more question?
I yield.
Thank you. So I looked at the transcripts, and is it not true that there was no refutation, if that is a word, of his guilt or innocence? It actually was, I don't know how to say it, that he got off on a technicality with double jeopardy. Is that not true?
Well, I would submit to you that if you were in prison for 20 years and tried, double jeopardy means that one court has found you not guilty under the rules of our criminal procedure, and then you're tried again. So that's why the law does not allow for double jeopardy, because it is unfair. So, I understand and I appreciate you, Mr. Chairman, because you were the chairman that reviewed this and came up with the amount in your committee, and you've done very good job in due diligence. But when we are wrong, when the state of Georgia is wrong, we have an opportunity and an obligation to say, I'm sorry. You can't give a man 20 years of his life back, but we can try and help him rebuild the remnants of a broken life. And that's simply what we're asking you to do here today. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield the will and ask for your favorable consideration of H.R. 29.
The lady has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the adoption of the resolution? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this resolution now be adopted? All those in favor of the adoption of the resolution will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. What purpose does Chairman Houston Rise.
Parliamentary inquiry,
State your
please.
inquiry.
Is it not true that this file that we had sent off, this case to the Court of Appeals, laid on the Court of Appeals office for 10 years, and nobody knows what happened to it? And 10 years to wait to hear a case is a little long, even in South Georgia. Thank you.
I'm sure there was a parliamentary inquiry in there somewhere. Yeah, if you say so. I do believe it. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine. On the passage of House Resolution 29, the ayes are 133, the nays are 29. This resolution, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 517.
House Bill 517 by Representative Carson, the 46th, to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 2A of Title 20 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated, relating to student scholarship organizations, so as to provide for the inclusion of earned entrance in the calculation of minimum revenue obligations for scholarships and tuition. This bill amendment is assigned to the Committee on Education. That committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee sub.
Chair recognizes Chairman Carson to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is House Bill 517. Everyone's familiar probably with the tax credit scholarship program that we have. The Georgia Department of Audit and Accounts did this report right here, issued in January of this year, and it noted a number of areas, and I'll just read the headline: additional measures needed to improve transparency and accountability. What we've done in House Bill 517 is incorporate a number of those recommendations and make it look and feel a little bit more like the rural hospital program. One thing is that interest from scholarship funds must be 100% spent on scholarships. There's certain audit requirements regarding the audit must be done in regard to generally accepted auditing standards, fund management, student eligibility, school qualification, and there's specific timelines, not in the statute earlier. There's specific timelines in which an audit must be done, and which an audit also must be posted on the Department of Revenue website. The DOR is specifically authorized to post the SSO audits on their website. Again, this is all about disclosure and transparency, and again, making it look and feel like the rural hospital credit program. The SSOs shall submit a Form 990. That's obviously it's a public form, IRS form, to identify how much salaries are within regard to these student scholarship organizations. We just want more sunlight and more transparency. And it sets the tax credit limits just like the rural hospital credit program. But again, it does not affect the overall program of $100 million. It stays the same, no increases in that whatsoever. So this is just to make this program look and feel a lot more like the rural hospital program with transparency and disclosure. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'll take a question. If there's no questions, I will yield the will.
You have a question if you care to yield.
Yes, sir, I will.
Chair recognizes the Minority Caucus Whip, Representative Wilkerson, to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I see that? Can you tell me what LC number you're working off of? I just want to make sure we're working off the same one.
Yes, so that's a good point to the Minority Whip. I'm working on the rules substitute. It should be LC 0502S.
Does the gentleman further yield? Or
Yes.
Is this a question? I don't know if anybody has that.
That was a version of the bill adopted in rules, and what that did, I'll just tell you the difference between what version you may have is this removes any references to increasing the $100 million cap
Yes,
and extending that.
and I think it was a good change because it puts it back to what the audit was, but I wanted to make sure that I have the final, that everybody has the
understand.
final version.
You have another question if you care to yield.
Yes, sir. 490502S.
Representative Wilkerson, had you finished questioning?
Sorry, I'm just kind of scanning. Yes, I'm
Okay.
John, you got it?
Chairman Carson,
I will yield for one more question, sir.
Chair recognizes Representative Mary Frances Williams in the gallery to your right for a question.
Oh, does the chairman yield?
Yes, ma'am.
So I have a totally different LC number, and I pulled it out of the book in the back, and the LC number that I've got is 4904992S, and it has a section, a part 2, that in lines 176 to 179 almost doubles the education tax credit for single individuals and married couples. Is that, or is that, I mean, I feel
Right.
like I don't know what's in the bill that we're voting on.
Right, you are correct. This increases the amounts of individual limits based on taxpayer's status. But, so for example, a married filing joint is a $2,500 limit. This goes to the $5,000 limit per the Rural Hospital Credit Program. And an individual, single individual on line 177 of my version goes from 1,000 to 2,500 like the rural hospital. But the overall program stays the same at 100 million.
Will the gentleman further yield?
Yes, ma'am.
So you're not increasing the total amount, but you're doubling, close to doubling the tax credit. And I know you keep comparing it to the rural hospital tax credit, but this is a tax credit for for funds that go to private schools, not public hospitals. Is that correct?
That's correct, but we're getting to operate both of them similarly.
All right. So one further question. I just am curious, do I or do I not have the LC number that you are working off of?
I am working on LC 490502S rule substitute.
So, Mr. Speaker, is it not somewhat unusual to ask us to vote on a bill when we don't have it in front of us?
The clerk's office tells me that the most recent sub will be on top, not behind. I also understand there are subs out in the hall, or is that supplemental calendars? Supplemental calendars are in the hall.
I have the supplemental calendar, and I did not see any rule substitutes for any bills when I walked in at 2 o'clock.
No, it's not, the subs are in your book on top of the bill. The most recent one on top is the one we're working from.
Oh, they're finding it, okay. Okay.
Mr. Speaker, we just don't have it.
You want to delay the vote?
Are we good to go? Are we good to go?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Chair recognizes Representative Williams to continue her questioning. Are you finished?
Yes, sir. I'm
Okay.
finished. Thank
All
you.
right, okay. Do you further yield?
I'll yield for one more question. I know that the hour's getting late, sir.
Recognizes Representative Carpenter to your right for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Is it not true a yes vote on this bill will promote transparency and listen to what the auditors are telling us we need to do to improve this program for all Georgians?
Absolutely, and incorporate those recommendations in the statute. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will yield the will and ask for your favorable consideration.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to withdrawing the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is withdrawn. Is there any objection to adopting the substitute offered by the Committee on Rules? The chair hears none. The Rules Committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines on the passage of House Bill 517. The ayes are 98, the nays are 71. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption. We're on now, picking up some bills off the supplemental rules calendar. The clerk will read the caption to House Bill 617.
House Bill 617 by Representative Martin of the 49th being entitled an act to amend Chapter 3, Title 20 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to post-secondary education so as to provide that student athletes participating in intercollegiate athletic programs at post-secondary educational institutions may receive compensation. This bill having referred to the Committee on Higher Ed. That committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes Chairman Martin to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I come to you today, and I want to thank my co-sponsors on the bill, Chairman Rhodes, Chairman Fleming, Dean of the House, Calvin Smyrie, for helping us. There exists a situation around college sports where young student athletes are seeking to be compensated for their name, image, and likeness. That is certainly something that's going to be done nationwide. This bill today seeks to put in Georgia code that when that happens, our Georgia student athletes in public or private institutions will be treated fairly and will have a seat at the table. Mr. Speaker, it's as simple as that. It has a education requirement that universities provide these young athletes assistance with finance, and it puts finances in doing that, and it puts in place protections for them. But really, Mr. Speaker, this just puts our athletes in a place where they have a seat at the table, and when that comes together nationally with the intercollegiate sports groups, that they will be treated fairly. If there are no questions, I'll yield the will and ask the House's favorable consideration so that our student athletes, men and women, can be treated fairly.
Do you have a question if you care to yield?
I'll take one since I did it quickly.
He's not well, maybe he was an athlete. He was a cheerleader. Chair recognizes Representative Reeves to your left for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
I pause for effect. Yes, sir.
Isn't it true that I was very against this bill when I had the misunderstanding that it did not apply to mascots, but once I saw the light and learned that mascots are protected, I am the biggest cheerleader of this bill.
I'm sure you are, and we're all buzzing about your support. Mr. Speaker, if there's nothing further, I'd
No
ask the
further
House.
questions. Is
Thank
there
you.
any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. All those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the passage of House Bill 617. The ayes are 171, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 290. House Bill 290.
House Bill 290 by Representative Setzler, the 35th, and others, to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 7 of Title 31 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to regulation of hospitals and related institutions so as to prohibit hospitals and nursing homes from instituting any policy during a declared public health emergency that limits patients' abilities to be visited. This bill having been referred to the Committee on Human Relations and Aging, that committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
The chair recognizes Chairman Ed Setzler to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, it is an honor to bring before you today House Bill 290. This is a proposition that touches 11 million Georgians. It's a proposition that has been developed through the course of about 10 or 11 revisions over the last several weeks. We began this process very early in this legislative session, and we come to you today on crossover day with a bill that has been refined with input from hospitals, long-term care providers, members of this body, members of the public, and individual health care providers who work for many of the same facilities and entities that are standing in the hall in opposition to this bill. One of the things that buoys our efforts today is the number of licensed physicians and nurses who work for the very organizations that are opposed to this bill in the hallway, urging us to pass the bill that's before you today. I bring to you LC 8736 ERS after a rigorous and arduous process with Chairman Petrie, the House Human Relations and Aging Committee, and a number of members, some of whom you'll hear from today. As we start this debate, I want to make very clear to everybody, and I know there's a lot of debate and a lot of things that are said in this room. I want everyone to listen to this one thing. House Bill 290 does absolutely nothing to affect visitation in our hospitals and long-term care facilities. This bill is not about visitation. In fact, this bill very clearly gives the absolute power to hospitals and long-term care facilities to set their visitation policies. It gives the absolute control to hospitals and long-term care facilities to set whatever visitation policy they would want. What House Bill 290 does, however, it addresses the issue of legal representatives, those core number one single family members who are next of kin, who have the legal authority to speak on behalf of patients and alongside of patients to make sure patients' rights are recognized. This is not a visitation bill, and those who are watching this from around the state of Georgia, I hope I don't disappoint people. This does nothing to enhance the ability of Sunday school members to come and bring pound cakes to the hospital or to a long-term care setting. So everything you're going to hear from anyone who speaks today about this bill, about visitation and taking powers of visitation away and changing this, it's just factually wrong. It's just factually wrong. This bill does nothing to address visitation. It says explicitly that the visitation powers are retained solely by the hospital and the long-term care facilities. What House Bill 290 does, however, in an essential way, in a way that only this legislature can address, is address the legal status of next of kin representatives, legal representatives as they're called in the bill, and the second tier are what we call essential caregivers, people who participate in the provision of care in a long-term care setting. There are three categories this bill speaks to. It speaks to legal representatives, one family member, next of kin, that speaks for you if you're incapacitated or if you want to have someone at your bedside to help make a decision, legal representative. This bill gives you the right as a patient. It's not about visitors, it's about patients' rights. It gives the patient the right to have their next of kin at their bedside to help them make critical decisions in the delivery of care. One thing that's made this debate difficult, both in committee and in the public conversation, is a number of the false premises, the ideas that are thrown out there that just are not really even applicable to this. One of the key premises that's been false in this is that somehow this bill seeks to undermine control of care. Friends, I will tell you, the legal representative, the next of kin family member who is empowered under our current Georgia law to make these decisions, is recognized throughout our federal regulations. In fact, right here in 43 CFR 482, this is the CMS regulations, our federal guidelines. The federal guidelines say, the patient's representative, as allowed by state law, has the right to participate in the development and implementation of the care plan. At a minimum, the right to participate in the development and implementation of inpatient and outpatient treatment and care. This bill's not about visitors. What's frustrated me and candidly disappointed me is that, the organizations and hallways in this Capitol are expected to be held to a high standard. There was a letter that was put on in the offices of our members as recently as Friday. Emails sent out as recently as Friday that date back to February 24th in terms of the version of the bill they're talking about. There are there's 16 factual mistakes in this letter relative to the bill that's in front of you today. I'm not talking to you about 5 versions ago or 6 versions ago. I'm talking to you about LC 338736 ERS. What this does, Mr. Speaker, again, it's very clear. It creates this 3-tier of individuals. The legal next of kin representative has the right under HB 290 to have no less than 1 hour of contact, even under emergency circumstances, in a hospital setting and or a long-term care setting, because they're essential to the delivery of care. My son works in one of these regulated facilities. He's a 22-year-old young man working his way through college, making $15 an hour delivering meals to people in a regulated care setting. He has access to people's rooms. He comes in with a mask. He puts the appropriate PPE on. But the idea that he has special access because he's a W-2 employee of a hospital or a long-term care facility is a false premise. Because Dr. Tamara Lane, who's an attending physician in Columbus, Georgia, who sees between 4 and 6 COVID patients per week in a hospital acute care setting, was told that even though she visits the same wards day in, day out, week in, week out, she couldn't have contact with her own father, 74-year-old man in a hospital setting in Columbus, Georgia. She was turned away. No, you can't see him. But I'm an attending physician. I practice here in this hospital. I'm here all the time. Why can't I go upstairs and see my dad? No. You can't go see him on a familial basis. Friends, the idea that people who are critical to care can't see people who need assistance in making decisions is nonsense. But yet a $15 per hour person like my son can roll the meal in to this person's room. But a family member, a key decision maker who's an attending physician in the same hospital has been turned away again and again and again and again shows the nonsense, shows the incongruity of our current state of the law. What House Bill 290 seeks to do is simply to recognize that although there's a need to spend a lot more time than 1 hour a day in making core medical decisions, this bill simply says this: the key decision maker, who under federal regulation is recognized as being essential to the delivery of care, is guaranteed at least 1 hour per day. Not on the terms they would set, but on the terms that is singularly set by the hospital or the long-term care facility. In HB 290, the hospital and long-term care facility has the absolute power to decide the time, the manner, the place, and the conditions in which that person would actually have contact. If the facility says you have to have a COVID test, a PCR test, you have to take your temperature every day for 7 days and then have your temperature taken before you walk in, you have to have a mask, you have to have a shield, you have to have total body garments on, all those are conditions that a hospital of their own discretion can set to have 1 hour a day access to help make decisions for this family member. All of those are given in the four corners of this bill to the hospital and long-term care facility without limitation. We were very, very clear in this bill. That's not an ECH responsibility. That's not a legislative responsibility. It's not a family responsibility. It is the sole authority of the hospital and long-term care facility to determine the time, manner, place, and conditions that they set. Because as conditions change over time, we know those providers understand the settings, whether it's in an ICU, whether it's in a special outpatient pavilion ward or anything in between, or a long-term care setting. They know their settings. Let them decide for themselves the context in which this important contact can be made. But we, the legislature, as directed by federal regulation, we decide, as provided by state law, the states determine the role of this legal representative, this next of kin family member. That's what HB 290 does, friends. That's what it does. People ask lots of questions. Well, what about this and what about that? Thank you. I appreciate all the members that have come to us over the last 3 to 4 weeks we've been working on this, because this bill has been amended so many times and worked on so many times from feedback from hospitals, from members, from physicians, people that have come to us from the long-term care setting. What about this? How would we accommodate this? Friends, I accepted 3 amendments as friendly amendments in committee as we worked through this process. I'd like to thank Chairman Petrie and his House Human Relations and Aging Committee. We had 3 hearings on this intentionally. This has not been rushed through the process. It's such an important issue. We have deliberately walked through every single piece of this bill, taken feedback from members of both parties, taken members from all entities out there, and landed in a place where we've found this balance. I'd love to talk through every piece of this bill. I don't know that folks have the patience for me to do that, but I will talk about a couple high points that I've not addressed yet. We talk about this issue of 1 hour access per day. That 1 hour access per day is subject to 2 further limitations that were brought to us as this bill's moved through the process. Limitation number 1, this 1 hour of access for this key legal decision maker to have access to a person in a hospital setting is limited to stays of longer than 12 hours. So if someone comes following an ambulance into the hospital at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they wouldn't be given access until 2 a.m. that next morning. 12 hours of time to make sure that all conditions are in place, the dust is settled before you'd ever have access, or the patient would have access to their key family decision maker. Why? We want to give deference to the facility. Furthermore, brought to us by hospitals through one of our medical professionals, yet another accommodation we've made in this bill is that attending physicians, based upon medical necessity, not a rule of the hospital or the long-term care facility, but based on medical necessity, the attending physician can postpone access to this critical decision maker, the legal representative, by 48 hours, 2 days, no matter how serious the circumstance is. In operating rooms, the attending physicians can say, representative, wait 48 hours. In transplant wards, representative, wait 48 hours. In isolation settings where somebody is immunocompromised, wait 48 hours. All of these have been firewalls of protection we've put in place in the four corners of the bill that is before you today to accommodate every circumstance one could bring to reasonably limit or constrain access of the key legal decision maker, that core family member who makes decisions with and for the patient, to accommodate all the concerns you've heard. All those things are in the four corners of House Bill 290, Mr. Speaker. Additionally, and I know we're limited on time today, the issue of essential caregivers, the second-tier person. Essential caregivers are defined as family members who are sitters. They're often used in a long-term care setting to actually help make sure folks are taking their medications. They monitor patients where the ratios of professional staff to patients are a little bit lower. These caregivers, subject to a gubernatorial emergency, have access for 2 hours per day, subject to the limitations set by the facility. Once again, we give our long-term care providers all the power to decide time, manner, place. If you want to have grandma rolled out to a special meeting room where that can happen, they have the power to do that. It's completely in the discretion of the long-term care facility. We give broad discretion to our healthcare professionals. But the one thing we cannot compromise is this idea that there's some level of access. That's what we do in HB 290, Mr. Speaker. As I wrap up and as I conclude my remarks today, and I know that we'll have some other speakers, I'm disheartened that there's a minority report, but you'll hear some other perspectives. But no matter what you hear, I want you to remember this. We've taken all this feedback. We've taken all this input from hospitals, from long-term care providers, and from members. We've boiled this down to the core essentials. Lastly, there's a claim that there's new rights of action. The idea that there's rights of action in this bill that could further expose long-term care facilities is simply factually false. I'm saddened that I've seen it in a letter from an organization. Any right of action beyond the patient themselves was pulled out in the committee process. It's just simply factually not true. And furthermore, we've provided the kinds of protections in this setting that we have currently under our coronavirus legal environment. This gross negligence standard for anything that could come out of this against a hospital or long-term care provider is provided long-term. It will go on continually in the context of these visitation policies. So we provide broad protections to our hospitals and our long-term care facilities. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, this idea of federal funding. There is more than 800 pages of Center for Medicare Services regulations that we've poured through in drafting this bill. 42 CFR 428213, 48310. We work through the entire body of regulation. We work through the interpretive guidance. And I've got publications for folks that want to see these things. It's crystal clear. States and states alone establish the full body of what a legal representative does, what the measure of their authority is. Because CMS recognizes we, the state, we regulate medical and nursing practice. We regulate facilities such as hospitals and long-term care facilities, and we regulate civil law. The status of delegated authority to representatives of any kind is established at the state level. And the regulations are crystal clear. It's our province to establish that. We're not running from it, we're answering it. And this bill is woven into the fabric of our current federal regulations to assure that nothing's going to happen that could jeopardize the funding of our hospitals and long-term care facilities. And Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I will say, if there's any further doubt, we've heard the term belt and suspenders. I appreciate Chairman Petrie working with us. We added a further provision in Chairman Petrie's committee, that the provisions of this article shall be construed to comply with the requirements of federal CMS to obtain funding for patients, residents, hospitals, and long-term care facilities, that any adjustments that need to be made to this will be made in the context of compliance of obtaining full funding with our healthcare facilities. A third layer of defense to make sure there's no unintended consequences of this vitally important bill. Mr. Speaker, before I yield the well, I just want to remind folks this has a human face on it. This is not a bill that was just developed, however, based on the human faces we see. I tell folks this has been kind of a nerdy bill. This is a bill that's been based on details and gutting through detail after detail after detail after detail to put the provisions in place to make this workable in practice. What's been disheartening has been just the seeming unwillingness to recognize time and time and time and time again the accommodations we've made to get the bill to this point, Mr. Speaker. But I would like to thank the members that participated in that arduous and I think ultimately fruitful process. But as we think about the importance of patience, my 82-year-old father-in-law, laying in the Gwinnett Medical Center last April with a heart attack. His legal representative just lived a couple miles away. She's a 35-year-old, recently retired Gwinnett County school teacher. His daughter, Natalie, my sister-in-law, was turned away at the door again and again and again and again. I'm sorry, you simply can't come in. Mr. Jim's going to have to withstand this himself. He's going to face these decisions of bypass surgery, of stents, whatever it was going to be for his critical cardiac case all alone. And the fact that this 35-year-old Gwinnett County school teacher would be willing to put on PPE, masks, go through testing, follow the same procedures that hospital employees, doctors, nurses would follow, just to have one little bit of access per day to her dad to help him make decisions after his critical heart attack was a threshold for me. As I thought about this and stuff, how can we as a state give ourselves permission to say it's okay? To say it's okay that people are left alone to make decisions by themselves. That a 19-year-old young man or woman by themselves in the hospital have to make decisions that affect the rest of their lives without a mom or a dad able to come in and help them make that decision. They're left alone. Or worse yet, they're left to look through their iPhone. Look through their iPhone at their family members as they die in facilities that we regulate as a state. Mr. Speaker, HB 290 is a very light touch. HB 290 simply requires a very, very, very simple thing. It does nothing with representation. Anything you hear, it does nothing with visitation. Anything you hear today about visitors doesn't apply because hospitals and long-term care facilities in this bill have absolute control to control their visitation policies. But what this bill vitally does is for those legal representatives, that one family member who makes decisions for and alongside of their loved one, it guarantees them 1 hour per day access to help them make these critical, life-changing decisions, not as a visitor, but as a core decision maker in the care team of 11 million Georgians. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to bring this before this body, and I would ask every member's support and vote on House Bill 290.
We have other members who wish to be heard on the issue. Under the rule passed by the Rules Committee, debate will be limited to 30 minutes each side. Chair recognizes to speak to the bill Representative Bazemore.
If you give me a moment, Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, I have to wipe the mic down. Underlying conditions. Thank you. So, thank you, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. We've heard in Human Relations and Aging that HB 290 was entitled the Right to Visit Act, which eventually morphed into the Patient and Resident Representative and Visitation Act. I heard my colleagues say it's not about visitation, but if you look on page 2 of the bill, line 18, it says this act shall be known and may be cited as the Patient and Resident Representation and Visitation Act throughout the bill. On line 49, visitors. Also, if you go to line 1, 52, and 53, it talks about visitors. So I don't know if it was an oversight or if we're being misled. It says visitors. There was a very robust discussion and many heartfelt testimonies. We can all agree this is a feel-good, tug-at-your-heartstrings bill. I cannot imagine one of my loved ones in the hospital, nursing home, or long-term care facility during a pandemic and not being able to visit them. However, I do trust the medical professionals when they warn that in order to keep our loved ones and others safe, healthy, and alive, we will have to endure some precautions. The reason visitations were restricted was due to the pandemic that has now claimed, as of yesterday's numbers, 15,598 of our loved ones in Georgia. I choose to trust the science and medical professionals since this is their area of expertise. So it appears this bill will require hospitals and nursing homes to allow visitors in forensic units, psych units, isolation units that are designed for highly contagious diseases like Ebola or tuberculosis. These facilities are different as different as they are, usually place 2 to 3 people in the same room. If that's the case, each person is allowed to have 1 visitor. There are now at least 4 and at the most 6 people congregating in a confined space, a recipe for disaster. Who will be responsible at that point? Who will monitor the comings and goings of these visitors, contact tracing, whether or not they've been exposed to someone with COVID-19, or determine if they are asymptomatic? After hospitals have experienced a severe shortage in workforce during this pandemic, how will they be able to manage all the requirements outlined in HB 290? If visitors refuse to wear a mask, as some of them did when they came to testify, get tested, or divulge the results, will the staff be responsible to ensure everyone adheres to the mandates? We know this is challenging here. Why exasperate the situation hospitals find themselves in by forcing nurses to not only care for patients, but to also monitor visitors and now their length of stay? Why is it necessary to codify this process? Instead, let's allow the healthcare community to come up with processes that will protect patients, visitors, and staff. They've proven to be quite capable of doing such up until this point. So if a hospital, nursing home, or long care facility restricts visitation, maybe because there was a medical emergency, there was a breakout of some sort, that then will allow the patient's visitor or representative, even though they're not privy of the reason they were restricted, to file a lawsuit against the facility. The staff will then have to be taken away from their job, which is caring for their patients and your loved ones, to deal with a frivolous lawsuit that could potentially send an already financially fragile facility over the edge. Georgia does not need another hospital closure. Since people are currently receiving the vaccination and the end of the pandemic is on the horizon, in addition to the fact the author of the bill stated to me that if we were not in a pandemic, he would not have introduced this bill, which further proves there is no need to codify this process. If this bill passes, it will remain as law well after the purpose of the bill. Therefore, let's continue to adhere to the precautions the medical professionals have put in place to keep all of us safe, healthy, and alive. Will you believe the science? Do no harm and vote no for HB 290. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Roger Bruce to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, let me be clear. I'm not against people visiting their loved ones in these medical facilities. I totally understand the value of people interacting with their relatives while in the process of recovering from these illnesses. However, I also understand that people who are already sick are more likely to have serious symptoms or to die from this virus. I totally understand the emotional need of face-to-face contact and the clinical tests that show how human contact helps the healing process. Understandably, this is one of those issues that is right for some and very wrong for others. One size does not fit all. If your car were to break down, you would not call a doctor or a medical professional or a legislator to fix your car. You would call an auto mechanic. If you had a leak at your house, you would not call a doctor or a medical professional or a legislator to fix your pipes. You would call a plumber. My point is that while we all want to do something to help, there are others that are educated and experienced in dealing with this issue. They are called doctors and medical professionals. They are not called legislators. I looked at the bio of the author of this bill. One of the statements in his bio is that and I quote, that he is for constitutionally limited government. He is for constitutionally limited government. Clearly, this legislation is inconsistent with that principle. This legislation gets into the day-to-day operation of a medical facility and does not take into consideration the specific needs that exist now and what may occur in the future. I truly believe that the author's intentions were sincere and based on wanting to help, but the unintended consequences of taking away the local management's ability to look at what is going on in their facility and to be able to put policies and procedures in place that meet those needs is a serious mistake. Whether you are for or against visitation, we should all be against taking the decision-making process away from people who are given the education, who have the education and the experience to make these decisions. We have to think about the medical and scientific facts of what is going on, and we have to take into consideration the needs and the ability to take care of patients, doctors, nurses, staff, and the general public. I ask you to vote no on this legislation and return it to the professionals. Mr. Speaker, I yield the will.
Chair recognizes Representative Mitchell to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to HB 290, not because I disagree with the original premise, which is that physical contact is important to mental health and that we need a restructuring of policies, but because we need a better version of this bill. We need policies that are in line with science and medicine. The first call I received as a legislator about visitation of an essential caregiver, as termed in 290, in a long-term care facility was from an 80-year-old constituent whose mother was 104. They were both vaccinated, and she wanted to know why she could not visit. It was February this year, and our cases in Gwinnett were still above 10% PCR positive, which prevented the majority of families from entering facilities except for compassionate care visits. As I stand here today, the state of Georgia has a 5.8% PCR positive test rate, which means most long-term care facilities are very close to the threshold of being qualified as in low transmission areas for the first time in months, dramatically changing the ability of facilities and hospitals to allow visitation, whether that be of representatives, caregivers, or families. I've since received over 100 emails about HB 290. Almost all of the authors believe that this legislation will bring a substantive change to visitation policy during the epidemic. I wish that were true. We do need change. We know the impact of absent caregiver visitation on the health of individuals in care and on their loved ones who are so concerned about them. We know that grandparents, mothers, fathers, and children are the constant and the essential element of a caregiving program. How we go about initiating policy change matters. We have not had this level of pandemic in 100 years. Hopefully we have another 100 until we see its equivalent. But our public health policies are not designed for one specific epidemic, and we cannot ensconce in rigid state code the options that specific lawmakers believe are adequate for this epidemic for all future epidemics, because they cannot, by definition, serve a different environment. And the changes HB 290 seeks to make are primarily going to impact non-epidemic times when circumstances are dramatically different. We need to instead respond to the situation at hand in the way that best protects Georgians. Looking at local guidelines and CMS guidelines, there's no question we need revisions during this epidemic. There were no policy changes for vaccinated individuals because when these policies were written, there was no science behind vaccination impact. Indeed, there was no approved vaccine. We're not in that moment right now. We need to see changes both at CMS and at the level of the governor's executive order to support caregivers and visitations. This is what I tell every person I have this conversation with, and these are the places we need to advocate for change. HB 290, as it went into rules, does not sufficiently acknowledge infection control as an essential element to keeping Georgians safe. Hold on, sorry, I've lost my place. At an individual and a population level. It prevents any hospital and any long-term care facility from implementing entry controls to protect staff and designated representative from highly infectious individuals when necessary, whether that be people with drug-resistant bacterial infections or viral infections. It does not acknowledge that hospitals can actually reach the maximum capacity of staff and that prepping and supervising a daily designated legal representative to keep everyone safe requires healthcare workers to take time away from patient and resident needs. It does not acknowledge that during an outbreak inside a facility, preventative measures may need to include contact restrictions, just like a home quarantine does. We need this policy discussion to involve and be driven by the Departments of Public Health, as well as the Department of Community Health, working with policymakers and advocates. if we were going to enshrine in policy specific guidance for legal representatives or designated caregivers, we need it to be possible in the context of the system, the federal requirements, and we need the state to commit to funding required to implement it. An underfunded and unexecutable mandate leaves patients, residents, families, and facilities all extremely frustrated and unable to move forward. An alternative bill, HB 649, is a good place for that discussion to start. I think that effort should be collaborative and ongoing to revise policy because the problems that are heightened in the pandemic are just that. They're heightened, but not created. We need to do better all the time, and we need to build sustainable policies. Though I will be voting no on HB 290, I sincerely hope we continue to push for much-needed changes in visitation policies in this epidemic, no matter the designated title of those non-patients or resident individuals. Thank you very much, and I yield the wow.
Okay, that completes those who wish to speak in opposition. Now we go for 30 minutes to those who wish to speak for the measure. Chair recognizes Representative Patty Bentley to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise this afternoon, colleagues, to share my support of House Bill 290. But before I get further into my remarks, I want to thank each of you for all acts of kindness and love shown to my family during my husband's sickness since December 27th. I'm eternally grateful to each of you for all acts of kindness, and I would greatly appreciate your prayers, and I ask that you continue to pray for the entire Bentley family. But I especially want to thank my leader, James Beverly, for being on the phone with me that horrible night in December when that ambulance broke down on Interstate 16 on our way to Savannah. So I thank you so very much for keeping me calm, because I was quite hysterical that evening. And also thanks to our hospital friends out in the hallways that are watching. I thank you too for your support. But again, as I stated, I'm here to speak in support of the bill that's at hand right now, which is House Bill 290. Because a few weeks ago, I voted against a bill because it was stated repeatedly that it did nothing for the people. For the people. For the people. And I believe House Bill 290 is a piece of legislation for the people. And I ask each of you for your favorable consideration for a bill that will help the people across this state. Let's do what we can, colleagues, for the sick and shut-in. The hospital that my husband is currently in down in Savannah presently allows one visitor per day up to 4 hours. But the nursing home that he most likely will be transferred to will not allow any visitors any day. And he can't speak, and he can't feel. And that worries me all day long, knowing that my husband may be in a facility that I can't go in to see him, and he can't speak nor feel. You know, there's an old gospel song that says, if it ain't been no rain in your life, wait a while. If it ain't been no rain in your life, wait a while. And I know some of our new members are probably saying, what you talking about, Representative Bentley? What you talking about, Strawberry Queen? That's not proper English. It ain't been no rain. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. You're right. That is not proper English. But guess what? It's true. And how I know it's true, my friends? Because the Bible says in the book of Job, man born of a woman is a few days and full of trouble. It didn't say if you are a state representative, you are exempt. Neither did it say if you was a state senator, you are exempt. It says, man born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. And you know, there's another old gospel song that says, I'm so glad that trouble don't last always. And so to the people across this state, we are going through a troubled time right now, but just hold on. Help is on its way. It may not be House Bill 290, but I certainly hope that it is. I hope that it's something that will open the doors for us to be there with our loved ones. So to all of the families across this state, as I stated, we are going through a storm right now, but let's keep in mind that trouble don't last always. I am so glad that trouble don't last always. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield the well. Thank you.
Lady has yielded the well. Chair recognizes Chairman Newton to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. So many of us have all the different professions. Mine happens to be the last 30 years. I've been in a hospital setting. That's where I go every day when I work professionally. I work with a tremendous team who over this past year, when somebody can't breathe due to COVID, they've been walking toward that room, not the other way, which is what we'd all like to do. I work elbow to elbow with some nurses, PAs, nurse practitioners who are just incredible professionals. They're working today, taking care of Georgians in emergency departments across this area. But I really want to thank, number one, something that's been mentioned too, similar to the Strawberry Queen. We have people across Georgia watching this, watching what we do here on their behalf, and they feel just as passionately about their loved one. Maybe it's a child, maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a parent who's in dire need of some help that we can help provide. I do appreciate also the author of the bill who went through multiple revisions. Since I do look at this, having worked all my life in a hospital, I look at this very definitely from a hospital's perspective. I've been on the medical staff, we've been on executive boards. We work, and anything that would threaten our hospitals, I was very adamant that we needed to look more carefully, find a different way out, find a lighter touch, get to the right federal regulation so that we were sure we were not endangering that. And that's what I want to just say a note of thank you to the bill author for being willing to hear episode after episode, legitimate concern brought up and the bill changed. He mentioned, I don't know how many revisions, but we've had multiple revisions because of some of the stuff that's been mentioned today. I'm reluctant to substitute our knowledge here in Atlanta for subject matter experts like the ones I might have worked with at a hospital. I'm real reluctant to do that. But like I mentioned, the people watching across the state, there are people whose lives have been upended by some things that were missing, some opportunities that were there that are in federal regulation regarding a representative, a support person. And then there is visitor mentioned, as an earlier representative mentioned. Visitor is mentioned in the bill. That was put in there actually because it's the template that the hospitals requested. They wanted to be required to post their policy and to come up with a kind of an appeal process. So that was actually where language from a hospital was added to it. But what we did a little bit more, in addition to having visitor language in there, it was very clear from the same language in the Federal Register that addresses visitation policies that there are support people. That's different. It's a different essential caregiver, it's sometimes called. And then as you did more study, you realize there's this other small, very small category called a legal representative or patient, or representative of a patient. It's the same reason a parent can go in a child's room. It's not because it's perfectly safe to have an extra person in the room. It's not. It's not perfectly safe to have parents coming in and out. So they come up with reasonable safety standards to make sure that that child, a minor child, can have a parent or someone with them that's their legal representative to help them make decisions. If you've ever seen a patient who's gotten some challenging information, just like a child, even when we're adults, we like to think we're self-reliant and independent and strong decision makers, but that's when we're healthy. That's when we feel the way we do here now, running up and down marble steps, walking around on our own. When people are sick, you start to feel a little bit more like a child, a little more dependent on other people. Maybe you can't breathe to even get across the room. If you've ever seen when a loved one who cares only for that patient, for no one else in the hospital, but when they can come in, a decision maker can come in to the room with the patient, and I, as a doctor or a team of caregivers, can give kind of the information that we found so far and what our plan is going to be. But when you see that trusted individual step into the room with the patient, and maybe they grab two gloved hands, and you can see the anxiety melt off a patient's face, you realize, same way the Federal Register and CMS recognize how important visitors are, but this representative is far above that. And I appreciate the way this bill has been crafted for the lightest touch possible. I mean, if you told many parents they could only go an hour a day with their child who was the other 23 hours by themselves, you might have a problem. But this was considered to be the lightest touch possible for adult patients who would request it. They don't have to request it, but if they did request it, they could have a legal representative there with them to assist them in making those decisions, to absorbing the information when they're sick or can't breathe or in pain or sedated, to have somebody they trust there to listen to the information, to help them process it, to know that that person cares only about them. You can see we can make a difference. We can make a difference in the lives of people that are watching. We can make a difference if something comes up again. And once again, the last thing, the safety protocols are designed by the hospital. If the safety protocol is a knee replacement, the concern might be here for the safety protocols that you would require of a kidney specialist to come into the room. You mentioned tuberculosis. I go into rooms all the time with tuberculosis, but I take the appropriate precautions. If it was a flu season, a deadly flu season, it might be here. If it was COVID or Ebola, the requirements might be way up here. The hospital gets to decide that, and that's another thing I think the author made in a revision to recognize that we're not going to specify the safety protocols. We're going to let the subject matter experts specify them. But what we're not going to do is leave Georgians, patients, sitting in a bed, unable to fully comprehend, unable to have an advocate there with them, a legal representative. We can do better than that. The hospitals can do better than that. I hope we'll pass this bill and bring that relief to people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Chairman Bonnie Rich to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I come today to give a personal perspective, but before I do, I feel compelled to correct some misstatements. This bill very clearly provides that hospitals and long-term care facilities, beginning on line 85, shall not be prevented from imposing reasonable safety requirements relating to the in-person physical contact. There's nothing that this bill does not prevent that. And this bill is not written for COVID only. This bill is written in response to the best efforts that we made to respond to the pandemic, and we've learned from it. This bill was written so that we never again do to people what we have done over this last year. Sunday afternoon, last February, I unexpectedly became very sick. An urgent care nurse practitioner concluded that I had had a false negative flu test and sent me home with Tamiflu and instructions to alternate ibuprofen and acetaminophen. But shortly after midnight, I was in trouble, and my husband took me to the emergency room. The ER started IV fluids and medication and began testing. In the beginning, the nurses weren't in the room with me the whole time. They were in and out. But my husband was there with me. I was not alone. He went for blankets when I started to shiver. I had a fever of 103, 104. And he turned me onto my side when I got sick so I wouldn't choke. He gave me ice chips for my lips. I was in a lot of pain, and breathing was becoming difficult. Over and over, he would adjust and readjust the stretcher and shift my body so that I could get into a position that I could breathe. My blood pressure dropped dangerously low, as did my blood oxygen level, and my heart rate skyrocketed. The nurses were in the room with me constantly now. There was more than one, there were a few. They were pushing medications and doing different things, but nothing that they were doing was making me any better. I was getting worse. My whole body started to shake violently. I couldn't breathe and I started to panic. I could see that the doctors and the nurses were not going to be able to help me. The only thing that gave me any comfort was having my husband there with me, holding my hand and looking me in the eye to calm me down. When he was told how sick I was, he called my mother, who lives out of town now, in the middle of the night, and she booked a flight to Atlanta the next morning within hours. And I have a memory from that next morning in ICU of opening my eyes very briefly and seeing my mother smiling at me. Dr. Newton is right. It's very, very childlike. The joy that I felt, the childlike joy at seeing my mother's face, was indescribable. I couldn't talk, and I couldn't even hold my eyes open very long, but I did manage, I think, to curl my lips into a little bit of a smile so that my mother could see that I knew she was there and that I was happy that she was there. I know that I have a pain-free, beautiful, eternal life after this one, and I am so happy to tell you that my faith truly gave me a supernatural peace about what awaited me on the other side. I am not, and I was not, afraid of death, of what came after the transition from this earth, but I was, and I still am, terrified of the process of dying, because what I experienced was frightening and painful. First and foremost, I wanted the doctors to make me better. But when I saw that they couldn't, which obviously we see now that a week later they did, but I believed that they were not going to make me better. The only thing that I wanted then was to not be alone. That is all I wanted. When the doctor told my husband and me that they were taking me to ICU, I couldn't talk much, and it took me a while to get the words out because I didn't have very much breath. But I did manage to ask my husband to please not leave me. I knew I did not want to die among strangers. I felt an intense grief and sadness over decisions that I had made that I thought were going to leave my children without a mother. I really believed in that moment that I was not ever going to see my children again. And before I lost consciousness, I told my husband specific things that I wanted to tell each of our children. I don't even remember it now, but he told me about it. And the weeks after I came home, we pieced together a lot of what I didn't remember. And when I felt strong enough, I asked him what I had told him to tell each of the children, and he told me their messages. People have things that they need to say. Things need to be said. What kind of society denies this? How many people have died over this last year needing to say things to their loved ones, but were denied the opportunity? How many people have suffered physically and emotionally alone, wanting a loved one by their side to comfort them? Is there really anything more important than that? We all can imagine how terrible we would feel to be separated from a loved one who is sick or dying. And sadly, many of us now know what that feels like. It's happened countless times over the last year, and we heard testimony after testimony after testimony at the public hearings on this bill of people who did just that. I come here to tell you all today what it's like to be on the other side, what it's like to be the one who was sick or dying and possibly alone. Like Dr. Newton said, I was in a weakened state, physically and emotionally. The last earthly desire that I had was the comfort of being with someone I loved and who loved me. I'm independent, and I'm a rather strong-willed person. And that was my heart's strongest and last desire. Think about the elderly, those with dementia, adults with diminished mental capacity, intellectual disabilities. How terrified and confused must they be if this is how I felt? I think of Miss Debra Malone, a lady that I've met through this process. She has a daughter who's 43 now. When she was a young child in elementary school, she had a brain tumor. She was a normal, healthy child. She had surgery, and now it has left her daughter with the mental capacity of a 6-year-old. This lady hasn't seen her daughter in a year. Her daughter, her 43-year-old daughter, cries and asks her mother, who used to take her to the mall and visit with her daily, why she didn't come for her birthday, why she didn't come for Christmas. Think about how much people like Miss Malone's daughter need a loved one by their side. It's inhumane and contrary to a civilized society to deny anyone the comfort of love in their last months, weeks, days, or even hours on this earth. But that's what we've been doing for the last year. Our state has seen fit to allow compassion visits when one finally reaches the last hours of life, when they've become totally unconscious and incapacitated, when they have no idea that their loved one is even there, when they can't say those things that they need to say to their loved ones. That's when we let them in. That's when we decide it's safe enough that they can put on PPE and go in and visit. If it is safe enough then it is safe enough before that. There are things that can be done. We can make this work. We're smart. We're determined. We have family members who've been begging to be let in, to offer to test, to put on PPE, even who've been vaccinated and they've been denied access to their loved ones. Meanwhile, the employees carrying in the lunch trays and emptying the trash are allowed in the rooms all day long, even when 70% of them have refused to be vaccinated. That's wrong. That is wrong. There are reasonable protections that we can put into place to balance the public health needs with basic, decent humanity, and they're in House Bill 290 already. Don't let anybody tell you that they're not there. I helped write it. They are there. Nothing should stand in the way of your doing what you can to make this happen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative LaHood to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members of the House, we're here talking about the Patient and Resident Representation and Visitation Act. And I wanted to say the title because I wanted to point out the words patient and resident are both mentioned in the title. And the reason both of those words are in the title is because there is a difference between a patient and a resident. You see, a resident has taken up residence somewhere. I'm referring to the long-term care settings, because that's where my experience is. As a matter of fact, I grew up within walking distance of a 142-bed assisted living community that was owned and operated by my grandparents and my parents. And so from the time I could walk, I was running up and down the halls and playing hide and go seek and spending time, lots of time every day with people who were the age of my great-grandparents. And as I grew older, you know, the generation of people being served in our assisted living community were my grandparents' age. And today a lot of them are you know, friends with my parents and their generation. So the gap's closing. But I say all that to say that spending so much time with an older generation, I know for a fact that as a person grows older, their priorities change. And what's important to someone when they're 80 or 90 or 98 years old is different than what was important to them when they're 21 or 30 or 40 or 50. You see, it's the scarcity of something that makes it valuable. And I can think of a lot of different examples. But one is fresh on my mind from this morning. It was in the hall outside the Rules Committee this morning. The hallway was as packed as it's been all session with people outside the Rules Committee room. It's because time is getting scarce. People wanted their last shot at getting their bill through rules. Well, when you're 80 or 90 or older, statistically, you know, your time is limited. It's getting more scarce. And time with family and loved ones becomes much more meaningful when your time is running low. When you're in your last years, months, days, or moments of life. You know, this bill allows healthcare providers to set reasonable safety protocol around the legal representatives, essential caregivers, and visitors. I know for a fact that the quality of care goes up when a representative or advocate of the resident or patient is allowed to be present. That's a fact. This is about more than keeping people alive. It's about giving them a reason to live. Avoiding death is not the same as living life. I believe there's worse things than dying, and that's being kept alive with no purpose. And so I'm speaking on behalf of the long-term care residents in this state who have been, next week, a year, living with visitation restrictions. This bill goes a long way to make sure that doesn't happen again. And I acknowledge that there's good reason that the restrictions have been in place. But I also know that the cure can't be worse than the disease. And so that's why I'm asking you to please vote yes on this bill. Thank you. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Gilligan. 2 minutes are left on the those in favor of the bill's time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I had some notes, but with 2 minutes, I'll just talk very quickly. I want to thank everybody who has already spoken to this bill and to this important matter. This is a matter of the heart. On more than one occasion, and for more than one person, I have been the legal representative in the room. Making decisions for yourself is hard. Making decisions for someone you love, you can't measure the difficulty. I know what it is when a patient is coming out of anesthesia and the doctor is talking with the patient, and an hour or two later that patient has talked to me and said, "When is the doctor coming by? I'd like to know what's going on." That's why you need that legal representative. And I'll end with one other thing, because I know our time is short, and I'll echo what my colleague just before me was talking about being alive and the difference in being alive and living. Thank you. Because you see, being alive is just existing. It's eating, it's sleeping, it's doing those things that you have to do just to stay alive. But living are those moments that take your breath away. Living is what we need to be doing. We need to be striving. And I'm asking all of you here to consider the living and helping them to live their best, full, and complete lives. Please, I urge you to support House Bill 290. And thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Lady has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. We have a minority report. Under the rules of the House, 20 minutes are allocated to speak to the minority report. The chair recognizes Representative Robichaux.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe everyone in this chamber wants to do what's right for the citizens of Georgia. If only life would make those an easy decision. Unfortunately, that does not always happen. This past year has shown us that life is not simple, and that decisions made in this chamber need to take into account a future that no one can know. No one could have known the extent of this pandemic in Georgia. Over 800,000 infected, over 15,000 dead. No one could have known the world that would require such drastic changes in our lives to stop the spread of this virus. One of the most important lessons we hopefully have learned is that no one can know exactly what the next public health emergency is going to be, or how best to deal with it. This is why we need to rely on science. As many of you know, I lost my father in January. What you may not know is that he had 3 hospitalizations in the 6 months prior to his death. Like many in this state, I know what it's like to sit in a parking lot while your loved one's in an emergency room and communicating with the doctor and the nurses via phone, making medical decisions because I was his legal representative. But I also knew that the staff were doing what, in their expert medical opinion, was best for my father and for the other patients in that facility. They were following the science. The other 2 hospitalizations were later, and I was able to sit at his bedside for a limited amount of time with appropriate protective gear and going through specific testing as additional scientific evidence had allowed the medical experts to devise a way for me to be with my father. I walked through crowded ER hallways filled with beds against the walls with patients in many of them. Why? Because our ERs are overcrowded, and that is the best way they can provide care to the many number of Georgians who are still needing that care. These teams of dedicated care providers are doing everything they can to keep people alive, day in and day out. Some of you may have heard me talk about an immediate family member of mine who works as a physician assistant here in Atlanta. She has, for the past year, worked in a COVID ICU unit here in Atlanta. And she has described many of the obstacles she and her team members work through each and every day to provide the best care they can. They have sacrificed so much and have worked in conditions that no one can truly understand unless you have been there. She works 13-hour shifts, always putting the patient and the patient's families first. All of these amazing angels, she would love to have families with their loved ones, but she has also been in the trenches when she is having to take care of multiple patients that are on ventilators, on complex drug regimens, and in intricate care plans in an ICU room that was built for 1 patient, but because of the overflow of our facilities, have 2 or 3 in them. Every time she has to enter a room to take care of a patient, she changes her gloves, she changes her outer protective gear, she changes her protective face shield, she changes her face mask, and she actually changes her foot coverings. When she leaves the room, she removes all of this gear, and she repeats this process before she enters every patient room. She repeats this process over and over, again and again, for 13 hours. HB 290 would now also require her to monitor the time a patient representative is in the room with these patients. Is that realistic? HB 290 is a well-meaning attempt to try to right this crazy year we have been through. But when we pass legislation, we must think about what the future could hold. In this pandemic, over 25,000 long-term care residents have contracted the virus. Over 4,000 of those residents have died. When you compare this to the general population, the numbers and the science is overwhelming. 10% of the general public contracted the disease, and 1.8% of the general public who contracted COVID died. In the long-term care facilities, 21% of the residents there contracted this disease, and 17% of those residents died. That's 10 times more of our most vulnerable citizens who have contracted and died from this terrible disease than the general public. Science has shown us that infection control in these facilities had to be increased to contain this killer virus. With the introduction of the vaccine and better infection control procedures, we are seeing success in the reduction of these infections in these settings. Science should be used to allow family visitations moving forward. I've heard many under the Gold Dome praise Governor Kemp for following the science in his decisions regarding the public health emergencies orders that have been in effect since April of last year. Many tout this as a reason why Georgia is doing so well this past year in our businesses and unemployment and other aspects. What I cannot understand is why is it okay to follow science when it comes to opening businesses, but according to HB 290, not when it comes to taking care of the health of Georgians. No one denies that family involvement in healthcare is the gold standard that those of us in the field have always strived for. I have worked in healthcare and public health for over 40 years, and I have always welcomed involvement from family and loved ones when, in my professional opinion, it would not have been a possibility of harm to my patients or to my staff. Science has always driven my patient care decisions. This bill and this body cannot know what the next public health emergency might be. Could it be a disease more like Ebola, which can be transmitted by contact through a simple abrasion on your skin, or a virus transmitted through some other mechanism? We just don't know. This bill contemplates that a person in a transplant unit or a severely immunocompromised condition will suddenly be in a better clinical situation within 48 hours. That is not how medicine or science works. We all want families to be together in difficult times. We all want our elderly citizens to have their loved ones close to their side during their remaining years. We all want what is best for all Georgians. I believe we should leave decisions regarding science and health to those who are best qualified to make them, the scientists and public health professionals, not to the politicians. HB 290 dictates rules without taking into account what science and this virus has taught us. We cannot know the future, what the future will be, and how we will have to adjust our lives to deal with whatever comes next. There are other measures that have been proposed that I believe are better solutions to this pressing issue, and I hope that those are given fair consideration as we move forward in this great unknown we call life. For these reasons, I urge you to vote no to HB 290. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
The lady has yielded the well. The chair recognizes Representative Allen to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So let me start off by acknowledging how serious of an issue this is, and one that's very difficult to solve. And I know that firsthand because of the line of work that I'm in and working with hospital systems in every corner of this country. There have been many administrators who I've sat on the phone with in tears over this issue. So this is a very, very important issue, and one that I thought so important that I also drafted an option to be looked at, because having that access is extremely, extremely important. There are times when loved ones, in their most dire times, need that access, as Representative Rich and others have talked about, that it's extremely important. I, along with others in this chamber, have been personally impacted by what is going on with the lack of visitation. Back in September, I was dropped off at the emergency room at a hospital here in Atlanta. My wife waved to me from the car because they wouldn't even let her get out of the car, let alone come to the door. It would be 6 days later until I was able to lay eyes outside of FaceTime on someone I love and trusted. This, as I said, is a very, very serious issue. Now, I want to be clear that no one, not one nurse, not one staff member, not one administrator, not one technician took delight in keeping a family member away from someone they love that was on a gurney or in a bed inside of a hospital. Those family members are a critical part of the care team and provide relief, insight, and support to the staff. If you talk to a nurse, no one is more happy to have a family member at that bedside than a nurse, because it relieves them from going to get the ice chips, from helping them to the restroom, helping them shave. We understand that these family members are a very, very critical part of the care team, and something has to be done. The question is this bill the right way to do it? Now, I want to separate hospitals from long-term care facilities, because if this bill were just about long-term care facilities, I would likely be okay voting yes, but it's not. This bill forces hospitals and physicians to go against the vital tenet of their practice: first, do no harm, and instead says, first, listen to the state. This bill requires that a hospital, in the face of a medical emergency, ignore CMS, CDC guidance, and even an executive order. Now, we've heard the conversation about it gives the hospital reasonable restrictions to be placed. But it also has a cause of action which says, if I, the loved one, don't think what you're doing is reasonable, I'll see you in court. Tying up a situation where we're wanting access, but instead getting access to the courtroom. So as the bill states, the policy also must be posted on the website, but in a medical crisis, the average person is not looking for, nor knows to ask to see the policies of a hospital. So the reason for the complex classification system that the author talked about is this was the only way to get around the CMS guidance, by finding a provision in the rule that gives states the ability and the flexibility to have this designation of a legal representative. But I think we're drastically stretching the privileges the designation gives to such legal representation. Must we not forget that we have been living through an unprecedented time with a virus that has been raging out of control, and the care facilities, all they wanted to do was protect its operation and trust, and protect those entrusted in its care. Once again, first, do no harm. So I want to thank the nurses, doctors, housekeepers, technicians, as I said earlier, all of the care staff for what you've done over the last year. We know that it was not your desire to keep people out. I believe this bill is a bad way of showing that you are the heroes that we put yard signs out in front of all these hospitals for. We know that these policies were put in place to keep patients safe, but most importantly, to keep you safe, and this bill basically erodes that protection for the group who proudly wears the badge of essential worker. Just think of what would have happened if there was a major outbreak at a hospital and staff was sent home in quarantine at a rate that put the operation in jeopardy. This actually happened early in the pandemic in a hospital in New York City. If you recall, in the Bronx, they were sending people away from the hospital that were already in care because of the inability to find staff that could come in. But for the health of the staff, There is no one to care for the patient. Once again, first, do no harm. Hospitals must be entrusted to do what is best to maintain operations, or they are not helpful to the communities, the patients, or the families that they serve. Now, to the families and those that have been pushing for access, I hear you. We all hear you. And we all have a heavy heart for what you have gone through. And I think everyone in this chamber is committed to getting something done to make sure this never happens again. But this legislation we have before us is not the solution you have been promised. And it will likely not withstand the scrutiny if challenged. We have an opportunity to get this right. I've worked on legislation with members of both parties that is implementable. The hospitals agree. The families that I've talked to agree. And it would give everyone, families just like mine and others that have spoken, the assurance that the next time something like this happens, we will not be shut out. Now, we're going to vote here in a minute, and many will vote yes. But many of those yes votes will not be because they feel that this is the best bill. They feel this is the only option that they were given the opportunity to vote on. And with that, I yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. The chair recognizes Chairman Petrie for the chairman's time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, my friends, to address this very important issue. But I'm going to emphasize something real quick that needs to be said, and that is this. There are no bad guys here. No one is responsible for all that we have suffered with over the past year, and indeed, our hospitals, our nursing homes, our assisted living facilities, our personal care homes, and our community living arrangements, all of the facilities that are touched by this measure are heroes. And for everyone in this room that is on our committee, you've heard me say that at every meeting. What this bill about is more about what have we learned during the course of a pandemic. What have we learned? If we don't learn from these experiences, shame on us. Now, as the chairman of this committee, I want to make sure that everyone here is aware of something. I want you to first know that we put right at 6 hours of testimony, debate, and discussion into just this bill. I want you to be aware that we had close to 10 iterations of this measure as we listened to everybody's opinion on every side, every facility, all of their concerns, and of course, yes, to many, many, many Georgians who have suffered. This bill, according to the Department of Community Health that we met with at length as well, I need to make sure everybody hears this, does not in any way, according to the Department of Community Health, which licenses these facilities, does not in any way jeopardize any licensure or any reimbursement. And indeed, we used federal language from their statutes and guidance throughout the bill. The whole focus on the patient representative came straight out of federal language. Well, now let me tell y'all real briefly how I see this bill through two different lenses. First, as the son of a man who died during COVID, killed by a drunk driver, by the way, at 8 a.m., but I digress. And I saw the suffering that he lived through as he lingered for 3 weeks. The suffering that my father lived through and my siblings. That's my first lens. But I've got a more important lens for this bill. I have been a long-term care provider in the state of Georgia my entire career. I have dedicated my life, 30 years, to serving and caring for the weakest of the weak, the frail, the elderly, the disabled, children with developmental disabilities, children with autism. This is the passion that fuels my entire existence. It's who I am. And I want to tell you about this bill from that lens, because that, I think, is so important. When you've been a long-term care provider as long as I have, you deal with a whole lot of folks while they're suffering, and you deal with a whole lot of folks at life's end. And let me tell you what I have learned as a long-term care provider, as my other colleagues know so well, as Representative LaHood knows quite well. My friends, I cannot tell you the power of family. I cannot tell you the power, the healing power of family. It is crucial. It is crucial. And I'm going to ask y'all a question. I want you to imagine, if you will, being a developmentally disabled child, or a child with autism, or a senior with dementia or Alzheimer's. And I want you to imagine being in any of these facilities we've described with no one. With no one. With no one to touch you, to hold your hand, and you don't understand. And you're confused, and you're lonely, and you're afraid. Now, when you're a long-term care provider, that's what you know. And I'm telling you, that's what Georgians are suffering with across this state today. Some of them languishing in skilled nursing facilities for almost a year without being able to touch the human being in their life that they most love and care for. My friends, I'm going to simplify this for you now, because there's somebody very special that needs to speak to this bill. But I'm going to simplify this. This is real simple. Here's the deal. 30,000-foot view of this bill. Georgians are suffering immeasurably. Okay? Number one. Number two, pretty simple. If we can have, we in the long-term care world and others, if we can have a myriad of staff coming and going into these facilities, not just doctors and nurses and therapists, but aides and caregivers and housekeepers and people emptying trash cans and mopping floors. If all of those people can come in and out 3 shifts a day, all day long, every day, why can't that one legal representative come in for 1 hour a day? 1 hour a day. That person that they need to make decisions, that person that they need to help them understand what they're living through and what their healthcare providers are saying. Why can't we do that when all of these others come and go? That is the way you simplify this bill. That is what this bill does, and I'm going to ask you to support it today. And Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I'm going to yield the balance of my time to the Speaker of this House, Speaker Ralston.
Chair recognizes Speaker Ralston to speak to the bill.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I didn't plan to come down here today. Didn't write anything. I really was just going to let this get debated. But you know, it really kind of occurred to me that sometimes you just got to do what's right. You know, you got to give voice to those that may not give us campaign contributions, that may not be powerful, but they're Georgians. And when this ride's over, I want to be able to say that there was a time that I did that. And that's why I'm down here. I'm down here, first of all, to give great credit to the author of this bill, one who I've worked with for many, many years. We don't always agree. He's stubborn. He's detail-oriented beyond the point of driving me crazy sometimes. But he has worked ferociously on this bill. And anybody that says this bill doesn't kind of account for all of the science and all of the policy considerations and all of the health considerations just haven't read the bill or haven't seen the work that the author has done. That's one reason I'm here to say that. He's been joined by Chairman Rich, by Chairman Petrie, by Majority Whip Kelly, and so many others in working on a great bill. But I'm here to speak for some others. I'm here to speak for a young husband who called me last summer and said, "Can you help me get in to see my wife at a hospital because she's dying?" Well, it sounded easy enough, and I found out, I thought, of all people, maybe I could do that. I couldn't do that. He said goodbye on FaceTime. I'm here for a friend of mine who said goodbye to his mother through a hospital window while he and his family stood on a helipad outside because they couldn't say goodbye in person. And I'm here to speak for a daughter whose conversations I have heard, who tries to explain to Mama why she can't come see her. And then 5 minutes later have to explain again why she can't come see her. And I've seen Mama deteriorate because Mama's been alone. And those phone calls to the daughter are getting less frequent. That's why I'm here. I'm here for the people of Georgia. You know, I've been a little bit struck today by some of those that have taken certain positions on this bill because they talk a lot of times about we got to stand up for the people. Got to stand up against the special interest group and stand for the people. Well, that's ringing a little hollow today with me. It's ringing a little hollow. Because let me tell you, I know there's people in the hall out there, and they're friends of mine. They're dear, dear friends of mine. But you know there's another group of people that are waiting on this bill too, and they're not standing in front of a monitor in the hallway of this Capitol, but they're back in your hometown. And they're waiting, and they're watching. They want to see what you're going to do on this bill. And those are the ones that I choose to stand with today. I hope, I don't know what this House is going to do. I hope that you will send a message. Send a message that's so loud that it gets across the hall over there so that they know that this matters to us because it matters to Georgians. But more important than them, send a message to the people whose pleas and hurt and heartbreak we're trying to touch in some way. And it's for all those reasons that I ask you to vote yes on this bill. I yield the well, Madam Chair.
The gentleman has yielded the well. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All in favor of the passage of the bill will vote yes. All those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machine. For what purpose does Representative Cannon rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that this bill strips the powers of the governor and that it will be litigated in court?
Members of this House will have an opportunity to vote on that right now. For what purpose does Representative Holly rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true, well, rather, isn't it unfortunate that when I just spoke to my mother, who had to sit there as my sister died on that hospital bed, when we knew that this state did not give the Affordable Care Act money that would allow for her to live, is really something. Seeing the tears and the pain that people have expressed because we don't want to say goodbye to our family members. But I wonder when our state will have the capacity and the heart to put the money there and make it available so that people don't have to die on the hospital beds. Fortunately, that when I spoke to my mother, she told me as much as she wouldn't want to be there for my sister, she realized that if it was going to put her life and others in danger because we're in a pandemic, that this is something that we have to give to the doctors and make sure that they have the right to say what's right.
The chair grieves for your mother, but the measure you discussed is not what we're voting on. We're going to move on and vote. We've had a debate, nice and long, and the chair will recognize no more parliamentary commentary. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the passage of the bill. The yeas were 113, the nays were 57. The bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed.
All right, we're on the rules calendar. The clerk will read the caption to House Bill 255.
House Bill 255 by Representative Holcomb, the 81st being entitled an act to amend Chapter 24, Title 15 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to sexual assault protocol so as to require certain certifications to be filed. This bill has been referred to the Committee on Judiciary Non-Civil. That committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes Representative Holcomb to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As mentioned, today is International Women's Day, and it's also my sister's birthday, so I want to wish her a happy birthday. She was born in Valdosta when my parents lived there, when my father was in the Air Force some time ago. The bill that I am bringing before you today is House Bill 255, and this bill builds upon important work that this state has undergone for the last half-decade or so to improve the state's response to sexual assault. In 2016, you may recall that we worked to end the backlog of sexual assault kits. Since then, we have funded the testing of sexual assault kits. This has led to the identification of serial rapists, and it has also led to prosecutions of previously unsolved crimes. In 2019, we worked to extend the preservation of the time that we preserve evidence. In this legislation, which was developed by the State Expert Committee on Sexual Assault, provides a few more measures that will move the state forward. The first thing that it does in Section 2 is that it sets forth a certification for the sexual assault protocol in all jurisdictions. Not all jurisdictions have been complying with this provision of the law, which has been the law for some time, so this is to remedy that. The second section is to update the code to reflect cases where the victim does not want to immediately report the case. And then the meat of the bill is to implement a sexual assault tracking system. This would give a survivor the ability to track the status of evidence from the time of evidence collection all the way through to prosecution. It would be a very strong step forward in the state's overall response. And then the final section of the bill would be to increase coordination
on the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, which are the most serious and heinous criminal offenses that take place. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
You do not have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the passage of House Bill 255. The ayes are 174, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 653.
House Bill 653 by Representative Jaspers of the 11th, to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 2645 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to definitions relative to the Georgia Pharmacy Practice Act, so as to revise the definition of pharmacy care. This bill having been referred to the Committee on Health and Human Services, that committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes Chairman Jaspers to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, I bring you the House Committee Substitute to House Bill 653. Members, all hands have been on deck helping with our communities deal with COVID-19. This bill will simply allow for our pharmacists to continue to offer testing for COVID-19 in serology, that's antibody testing, and the interpretation of the results for 12 months after the ending of the public health emergency is ended by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Mr. Speaker, that's all it does. Be glad to answer any questions.
You have no questions.
Thank you. I yield well.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the passage of House Bill 653. The ayes are 170. The nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 231.
House Bill 231 by Representative Gaines, the 117th, and others, to be entitled an act to amend Article 7, Chapter 5 of Title 16, and Article 1 of Chapter 13 of Title 19, the Official Code of Georgia, annotated relating to stalking and granting of relief by superior courts. This bill having referred to the Committee on Judiciary and Non-Civil, that committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes Representative Gaines to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to bring before you this afternoon House Bill 231, legislation that marks a significant step forward in our efforts against domestic violence in Georgia. Over the last several months, we worked with advocates, and in particular, I want to thank Chairman Mandy Ballinger and Representative B. Wynn for their work on this legislation. I also want to thank Chairman James Burchett and the Judiciary Non-Civil Committee for their hard work in getting the language right in this bill and its unanimous passage out of committee. Georgia is one of only 3 states that does not extend civil protections to victims of dating violence. Our current law denies access to potentially life-saving relief for some of the most at-risk victims of relationship violence, including those who are pregnant, teens, and young adults in dating relationships. Young women ages 16 to 24 experience the highest rates of abuse, almost triple the national average. This legislation would extend safety to victims who experience abuse by a dating partner by creating dating protective orders under Georgia law. Our current law is insufficient for victims. Working with Chairman Burchett and the committee, we fine-tuned the language, creating a new section outside the Family Violence Protective Order specifically for dating violence. Temporary protective orders are tools for victims seeking safety from abuse and are also an effective mechanism for abuser accountability. This bill will ensure that those in dating relationships and potentially some of the most vulnerable in our state have access to this life-saving relief. States who have proactively included dating partners in their protections under temporary protective orders have seen an 11% reduction on the total rate of intimate partner homicide. 47 other states already ensure victims of dating violence are covered in their laws, and I'm proud that with this body's support today, we'll be one step closer to joining them. Mr. Speaker, I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
You have a question if you care to yield.
Be happy to.
Chair recognizes Representative Cannon to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do you yield?
I do.
How would this bill affect those in the LGBTQ community?
Well, this legislation would impact any victim of dating violence that would fall under the language in the bill.
No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well and ask for this body's favorable consideration.
Chair recognizes Representative Wynn to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to take a moment today to thank Representative Gaines and Chair Ballinger for working on this issue, as well as members of the Judiciary Committee and the many advocates who helped us bring this bill forward. And I think it is important just to talk about how this legislation will save the lives of Georgians. In the past year since the pandemic has began, Georgia has seen a 79% increase in domestic violence. Domestic violence is an issue that impacts all communities, and it transcends age, race, gender, geography, political party, and economic means. But what we do know is that it does disproportionately impact women and girls, and that it is a cycle, if not broken, will become deadly. Georgia actually ranks number 10 in terms of women who are killed by men, and the majority of these cases are connected to domestic violence. I was startled and alarmed to learn that 49% of victims who began their relationship with the person who eventually killed them were between the ages of 12 and 24. So with this temporary protective order in place, victims can seek immediate relief. They won't have to wait until additional incidences of violence or escalation before receiving protection. With this temporary protection order in place, the court can also order the abuser to seek counseling or to participate in educational programs offered by the state, because we know that abusers do not simply stop abusing. So this is about intervention and breaking the cycle for both persons involved. And if we pass this, it will save the lives of Georgians. Thank you. I yield the well.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of House Bill 231 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the passage of House Bill 231. The ayes are 174, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 579.
House Bill 579 by Representative Oliver, the 82nd, to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 75 of Title 36, the official code of Georgia annotated relating to war on terrorism, local assistance, so as to change a short title to the Public Safety and Judicial Facilities Act. This bill I refer to the Committee on Governmental Affairs. That committee recommends that this bill do pass.
Chair recognizes Chairman Oliver to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 579 is a general bill that allows all counties to create an authority for the purpose of doing renovations or constructions of public safety or courts. Only DeKalb County has used this, so it's really application of a referendum that was imposed by DeKalb in 2007 is the only county that's had that burden. I think it's prevented other counties from being able to use this act, and I ask for your favorable consideration to remove the requirement of the referendum from the Public Safety and Judicial Facilities Act. Water authorities, housing authorities, hospital authorities don't have referendums. It was totally an anomaly in this case historically. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the passage of House Bill 579. The ayes are 169, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 258.
House Bill 258 by Representative Saints, the 180th and others, to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 6 of Title 16 of the official code of Georgia annotated relating to sexual offenses so as to provide a response to State v. Williams, decided February 10th, 2020. This bill having referred to the Committee of Judiciary and Non-Civil, that committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes Representative Sains to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is relatively simple. It is a response to State v. Williams 2020, which had it to where a step-grandfather almost got away with a sexual battery to his 4-year-old step-granddaughter because the Supreme Court dictated that in the cases of sexual battery and aggravated sexual battery, the defense to prosecution of an individual being, a victim being under 16 must be codified to be utilized. So this fixes that by putting in statute that when an alleged victim is under the age of 16 and such actions are for a sexual nature, that a consent of the victim cannot be used as a defense to prosecution. With that, I'll yield for questions if there are any.
If you yield for questions,
One question, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative McLaurin up in the gallery to your left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
It's good to see you, Representative. Is it not true that this bill passed out of committee with bipartisan support because it balances the need to prevent proving consent in those cases with having a definition of the statute that ensures that parents and other caretakers and people dealing with small children innocently don't get swept up in the statute?
Gentleman knows what he speaks very well. It's a very balanced and measured approach. We take sexual battery. A major element of that crime is the consent itself. To take that away, there were some fears that it would make it easier to charge. So this is a very balanced bill for those specific circumstances where that should clearly not be applicable. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'll yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the passage of House Bill 258, the ayes are 173. The nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 479.
House Bill 479 by Representative Reeves, the 34th, and others to be titled an act to amend Title 17 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to criminal procedure, so as revise certain arrest powers. This bill having referred to the Committee on Judiciary, that committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes Representative Reeves to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, it's worth repeating. I said this in committee, but having the opportunity to become involved with this legislation after the work that Chairman Efstration had done to set it up was really like being a Braves relief pitcher and being called in the game after Greg Maddux had pitched a perfect game. And so I'm very privileged and I'm very thankful for the work that my friend, Chairman Chuck Efstration, brought us on this very important issue. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to talk a little bit about history and about this room. And I love coming in this room. It's an incredible privilege. It's an honor. It's a rare honor. Not a lot of Georgians get the chance to do what we get to do. And as crazy as this room is while we're in here doing our business, if you come in here early enough or if you stay late enough, you can be the only person in this room and you can sit here all by yourself. And it's a very quiet place, and I love doing that, and I've done that for the last 7 years on multiple occasions. I love looking at the ceiling, the wood. I love the history of these desks. If you've never heard it, you should ask Chairman Matt Dollar about these desks. He knows more about the history of these desks than maybe anything else he knows. So It's actually, I love the way it smells in here, the wood. Keith Williams, the speaker's lawyer, has got a picture in his office of, in a non-COVID year, I sit over here in the first row in the corner, and he's got a picture in his office from my desk, facing this way, of this room from the year 1895. And it looks almost the same as it does right now. About a year ago, I saw that picture and had him send it to me, and the picture really kind of made me reflect. And what it made me reflect on was, if these walls could talk, if these walls could talk, and if the walls of the Capitol in Milledgeville from 1907 to 1967, and the other building in Atlanta from 1968 till 1889, when this building was erected, if those walls could talk, what would they say? There's been a lot of really great things, a lot of good things that have happened in this room, and we celebrate those things. There's also been some not so great things that have happened in this room. And one of the greatest opportunities that we have, that anybody that gets this chance and just this little sliver of history to come into this room and have access and to be able to voice a vote on an issue, one of the greatest opportunities, and frankly, one of the greatest obligations that we have, is to correct some of the wrong things that happened in this room. And I think that that's an opportunity that we have before us right now. You know, I don't take for granted one bit of this experience. If the Georgia General Assembly is a pie chart, then 2021 is just a little tiny piece of pie in that big pie that makes up the history of this state and everything that's been done legislating in Georgia. And so here we are. The way that it has worked out is that everybody in this room right now is a part of this 2021 session, and we've got the opportunity to do something that's important. Mr. Speaker, I have thought a lot this legislative session about the concept of legacy, and I'm not going to talk much longer, but I've thought a lot about legacy. I wanted to, about 8 years ago in February, a little bit more than 8 years ago, was when I decided that I was going to run to be a part of this body. When I was a high school junior at North Cobb High School, Miss Linda Morrison was my teacher, and she inspired in me a desire to do this, and that's something that I'd worked really hard for. And 8 years ago, decided to do that. And so when I decided that I was going to run for this position, I didn't even know my wife yet. I hadn't met her. I met her later that summer, and our entire year of dating was campaigning. And so I won, and I came into this thing with all of these ambitions and all of these thoughts about what it means to leave a legacy in this room, to leave a legacy in my community, to try to do some good things in Georgia and really try to make Georgia a better place. And that was my idea of what this concept of legacy meant. And I got to tell y'all something. Something happened. As I said, you know, I married my wife. My wife came with a 5-year-old. My stepson, Charlie, is 12 now, but he was 5 years old. And so by the time I came into this room, I had a 5-year-old stepson. And then my son, Albert the Hurricane, came within my first year of being in this body. Albert was born. And I say this to say this is very important, is that something happened to me simultaneously as I got to experience this, and what I thought was going to be my important legacy. What I realized is that what the important legacy is your family and your children. My boys, Albert and Charlie, are my legacy. And it's not what we do in here, but it's the people that love us and the people that we love. And those two boys is what my legacy is. And I learned that, and I've learned that every day for the last 7 years. And I say all that to talk about Ahmaud Arbery. One of the things that I've had the opportunity to do in carrying this legislation is to spend some time on the telephone with Miss Wanda Cooper-Jones, and that's Ahmaud's mother. And I've talked to her a few times. I've texted with her a bunch. She's gracious. She's so thankful for what we're doing. She handles herself with incredible dignity. Her son is gone in the senseless violence that the whole world had the opportunity to see. She has pain and she has hurt, but she is thankful for what we are doing here. But her ability, I talked about my legacy that I want to leave my boys. Her ability to leave that legacy in Ahmaud and watch Ahmaud's legacy was taken from her. And Ahmaud's father, Marcus Arbery, has said he does not want his son's death to be in vain. And I'm going to tell y'all something. Ahmaud's death is not in vain. I'm going to say it again. Ahmaud's death is not in vain, because we're going to bring change. We are bringing change. Ahmaud and his life and his legacy is going to be that agent of change. And in this General Assembly in 2021, every single one of us have the opportunity to take part in Ahmaud's legacy. And we owe that to his mother. We owe that to his father and all of his family and friends and loved ones. And we owe it to Ahmaud. And so I'm asking everybody in this room, I want us all to rise to the occasion, and let's rewrite a law from history, but let's also rewrite future history in Georgia. Mr. Speaker, I will yield for any questions.
You have some questions if you yield.
I will.
Chair recognizes the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Chairman F. Stration, to your left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Gentlemen, yield.
I do.
To the administration floor leader, isn't it true that all 50 states have some form of a citizen's arrest law on the books, and by passing this bill here today, and if it's ultimately enacted, Georgia would be the first state in the country to repeal the citizen's arrest law?
That's absolutely right, and it's incumbent on Georgia that we do that in light of what happened in our state last February.
And isn't it true, Representative, that building on the great work that this state did passing the hate crimes law in 2020, we could send a message nationally that Georgia's too great to hate, thanks to this legislation, the bipartisan effort, and the leadership of Governor Kemp in bringing this issue this year?
The gentleman knows of what he speaks. I'll continue to yield, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Cannon to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do you yield?
I do.
Has there been consideration to naming this the Ahmaud Arbery Act, since we all know it's very clear?
That has not happened, but I have absolutely no reservations and concerns about, as this bill carries on into the other body, of making that a part of this. And I think that that's actually a fantastic idea. I'll continue to yield, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Dukes in room 341.
Would the gentleman yield?
I do.
First of all, I want to thank you for bringing this legislation. is it not true that these laws were passed probably 100 years or so ago?
158 years ago.
And is it not true that this is one of those attempts that we're driving for in this nation and in this state to right grievous wrongs that have been perpetuated against the Ahmaud Arbery's of the world?
Not just Ahmaud Arbery. I've researched this issue on my own, and I know that it is a fact that there were decades of lynchings that took place in Georgia where this law was used as part of that justification.
I want to thank the gentleman for bringing this bill.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'll continue to yield.
You have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's get this done, y'all.
We have a number of members who wish to be heard on the measure. Chair recognizes the Dean of this House, Dean Smyrie, to speak to the bill.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, last year we passed the hate crime bill. I thought about it and I said this was such a historic occasion, and I'll never forget. I remember calling Representative Al Williams. I know he's going to speak, and I was on my way to Brunswick, and at the last minute, I decided not to go. And then I went to bed. Then I woke up the next morning with Ahmaud Arbery on my mind. And I got up, and during that time we were in the heat of COVID. And I knew my colleague, Representative Carolyn Hughley, I had talked to, and she was going, and I called her, and I decided to drive to Brunswick. And it sort of transitioned me in a way that when you're in a car and you're driving, and you're alone, and you're talking, and you're thinking. And I thought about what we were doing as it relates to the hate crime bill. And during that call, I called maybe 8 members of this House on the way, and one of them was Gloria Frazier, Representative Frazier. And she was in the process of having Ahmaud Arbery's mother that day in Waynesboro. And I called the speaker. I told him about my conversation. And we were working on the hate crime bill, and I called Representative Chuck Estration, and I say, when we get this behind us, we ought to repeal citizens' arrest. And it's not my idea. It's others that have talked about that for years. And so I went there and I visited and I met the family, and in the heat of COVID, I got back in my car and I drove back to Columbus. And I made up my mind at that juncture that citizens' arrest ought to be the next thing we tackle. And as a member of the conference committee on the hate crime bill, there was not a meeting that we didn't talk about citizens' arrest repeal. And hate crime was a very, very emotional issue for me. And I literally broke down at our press conference after the passing of the bill. I was very emotional because Georgia had moved a dark cloud from over his state. And here we are, fast forward now, and I want to thank the governor's floor leader. During the interim, I talked to Representative Estration a couple of times, and I said, we ought to do something about citizens' arrest. It's lingered too long. Too much has happened. Too many people have died. And now is the time for us to move the cloud again on citizens' arrest. And I promised Almond Arbery's mother that the Lord willing, when we get back to Atlanta in 2021, that there's going to be a group that's going to come together to pass citizens' arrest. And I come today to ask you to vote yes on House Bill 479. I will say this, that day in Brunswick was a turning point for me. Brunswick is a great city, and I kind of felt the change in the air there. And the bill itself, a lot of people have worked on it and have worked out, I think, some of the issues that were intertwined in the legislation. But I just come today with a heavy heart, asking you to vote yes. Now is the time. If not now, when? Now is the time. Now is the time for us to act. Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, I thank you for allowing me to come and to say a few words and to thank the gentleman again and all those that have worked on this legislation on House Bill 479. So again, now is the time. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Frazier to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To Ms. Wanda Cooper and your family, I know you're watching. This is a rose from you, from a mother to a mother. Less than 3 weeks ago, on February 23rd, which was on a Tuesday, we had session. I got in my car and I drove back to Augusta to be a part of Ahmaud Arbery's vigil that they were having at his gravesite. We gathered among hundreds of citizens at the gravesite of Ahmaud Arbery to both celebrate his short life of 25 years and to grieve his loss on this 1-year anniversary of the senseless and brutal murder that took his life. And while I stood in awe at the love and the support that was demonstrated during the vigil, I was shaken to the core by the deep cry of his mother, Wanda Cooper Jones. Representative Reeves stated how calm she was when he talked to her, how she was so self-preserved. But on this day, on the anniversary of his death, Miss Wanda Cooper gave a cry out that I will never, ever forget. She repeated, "That was my baby." She repeated, "He was my baby." And she said it about 15 times, falling to the ground. That pain uttered, those words she said, broke everybody down at that gravesite. It's a kind of pain that no mother should ever have to endure. It's the kind of pain that comes from losing one of your most treasured gifts, your child. Over the past year, I have had the honor of working directly with Ms. Cooper, and my aspiration and respect for her have grown tremendously. She has the strength of a titan. I tell you, her strength and courage and her persistence have been a driving force in ensuring that her son's death receives the attention that it deserves and that his killers are ultimately brought to justice. Her resilience and perseverance serve as a testament to depths of a mother's love for her child. I recently read an article about the deep fear that black mothers carry raising their children in America. Black mothers interviewed, this story said that they realized that all mothers worry about their children. As mothers, we want our children to have the best. When they're happy, we are happy. When they're sad, we feel their pain. As mothers, we hope our children choose good friends. We hope that they apply themselves in school and become successful and responsible citizens. We hope they stay away from drugs and alcohol and that they avoid unnecessary dangers. But the uniqueness of challenges for black mothers is that we have this extra layer of fear, this griping reality of the dangers our children face, because we know that while they are our babies, to someone else, they might seem to be a threat. It's an anxiety that black mothers live with every day. Unfortunately, passed along to our children because we want them to stay safe as possible. There is nothing more sobering than having that talk with your children. I have 2 adult daughters. We've had the talk, and I still talk to them, although they are up in age. No, I'm not referencing to talk about dating or talk about college plans or your career goals. I'm referring to the uncomfortable conversation that black mothers have with their children, informing them that regardless of how amazing they are, how incredibly brilliant they are, or how kind and loving they may be, they may also be feared. They may seem as a threat, subsequently harmed because they are viewed that way. And although it is not right, and although it is not fair to them, it is reality in which we live. It is no secret that Ahmaud was failed. It is no secret that his life was cut short at the young age of 25 because someone saw him as a threat and thought they could take his life and hide behind a law. And while we have been seen at progress over the past years with the arrest and indictments of his shooters, today we are presented with an opportunity to address and overhaul the outdated law that has been used to unfairly target black and brown men and women in the state of Georgia. We have the opportunity to ensure that this law, originally penned back in the 19th century, is no longer misused and abused by those with racially motivated ill intentions. We have an opportunity to honor Ahmaud's legacy by shifting the narrative and making a declaration that the state of Georgia is committed to the just and fair treatment of each and every one of its citizens. So let's give Ms. Wanda Cooper a degree of peace for a lifetime of sorrow that she will suffer. I ask you to support House Bill 479 and show the world who's watching right now that Georgia will not tolerate racial profiling. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Al Williams to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a corner of this state, is some of the most beautiful real estate in America. I'm fortunate to have been born in that corner on the coast of Georgia. Some of the most beautiful areas in that beautiful area is found in the Golden Isles, the beautiful swimming waters of Glenn County. It's always been just below the surface that there were problems. As a youngster, in 1964, I can remember marching with Reverend J.C. Hope in Brunswick, then just to get the right to eat a hamburger. Then I can remember giants, some of whom were my mentors, who worked to bring about racial justice and understanding. My predecessor, Reverend E.C. Tillman, spent his life doing that. Gentlemen, we honored here on this floor this session, Mac spent his life coaching and working in education as a board member of Sea Island Corporation. When I first came as an employee of the Lieutenant Governor Zell Miller in 1975 to this beautiful dome, it was impossible to have a bill like this come to the floor and be debated. 479 wasn't even in the making. As a matter of fact, we were at the point where the United States Supreme Court had to seat a duly elected representative. So while there's much room for growth, so much good has happened. In my first term, I represented the area that Abad lived in and where he was murdered. That was the first area I represented when I was sworn in 2003. And it's unfortunate that I know one of the gentlemen that is incarcerated for his murder. He worked with one of my sons. He worked in Liberty County, though he lives in Brunswick. Well, the time has come. You see, no wrong ever reaches a point where it can't be made right. And this is the time to be a shining example. At the coast of Georgia is not just one of the most beautiful places in the world that entertains some of the great figures of the world. When in my freshman year, I worked on a committee down there for the G8. What an experience. Leaders from all over the world. At the Coaster, one of the premier stops in all the world. But it's not good enough for a state to be the best state to do business in. For it cries out for that state, from Washington State to the tip of Miami, from the Alleghenies of New York to the flatlands of Texas, folks should say, Georgia is one of the best places to live. Living. Port Aubrey would not be able to live this beautiful life on the beautiful coast of Georgia. But as I said some weeks ago, all things work together for good. And his death has created good. 479 is the good that comes out of his death. As sad as it is, and how it looks like there is no light, out of his death comes this day that we have the opportunity to say to America that this is not the Georgia of old. This is not the Georgia where a slave ship stopped in the Sound off of Jekyll Island came around to St. Simon's, and Igbo warriors from Africa unloaded and revolted and ran away. And when they were almost caught, they drowned themselves in the river there in St. Simon's rather than be slaves. And when on a dark, silent evening on those coasts, you can hear the wailing of the Igbo souls. We're the New Georgia, where all men are created equal, and women. And Aubrey, thank God for your spirit. Thank you, his mother. Thank you, his father, for once again, all things have worked together for good. I urge you to vote for good for Georgia by supporting House Bill 479. Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Chairman Don Hogan to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 479, I'm the second signer on that bill. When this tragedy happened, our community couldn't believe that it happened. Down in Satilla Shores, which is a great community in the south end of Glenn County, Aubrey Amon jogged that road every day. In fact, he lived across the road, and he had on his jogging shoes and his jogging outfit, and he was not doing anything wrong, but just jogging down the road as far as I know. And these three individuals, loaded with a shotgun and a pistol in the back of the first truck, and the fellow taking the picture with his camera, his cell phone, in the second truck. These men have been charged with murder, which they should be, because that was a heinous crime that was committed against a young man who is a citizen in my community. It's been very upsetting. Many sleepless nights worried about the family. It happened in my community. The community is still very upset about it. We had individuals that demonstrated. We didn't have any writing. We had the people coming and supporting the community. Sheriff Neil Jump was very effective in making sure everybody got to demonstrate and do what they needed to do in the celebration of Ahmaud Arbery's life. And right after this happened, I got in touch with Representative Carl Gilliard, and he and I talked about the citizens arrest law. And I'd like to thank Chairman Chuck Abstration for doing what he did on the bill, because he worked very hard on it, and then Chairman Reeves for what he's done on it. But I think this is the right thing to do. It's supported by the community in Glenn County. We have some fine people down there that live in the island and in Glenn County. I've lived there 52 years, and it's one of the most wonderful places that you can have a family and that you can enjoy what we have in coastal Georgia. And I just would appreciate you supporting this bill and you voting for it. It's the right thing to do. It's an old bill, it's outdated, we have no need for it. The people that were trying to, I assume they were trying to arrest Ahmaud, but you know, they were not policemen, they were individuals, and people who are just individuals, I don't think they understand the law, and they don't have what it takes to go out and try to arrest somebody as a citizen's arrest. I think it's the wrong thing to try to do. It's an outdated bill, and we don't need it. And I'd appreciate you voting for this legislation, because I think it's very meaningful to me. I'm still very upset about this situation, and it's something that we'll never get over. When you lose a child, that's the worst thing that I think can happen to a family. So please vote for this bill. I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I yield the will.
Chair recognizes Representative Bodie to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of HB 479. I rise today to make history with this noble chamber by the passage of HB 479. The current citizen's arrest statute in Georgia needs to be repealed. Mr. Ahmaud Arbery, it's the case that brings us here today, debating HB 479 on the floor of the Georgia House of Representatives. Mr. Minority Leader, today we have the opportunity to repeal a law that was passed during the civil rights era. No Georgia citizen should be permitted and allowed to pursue, chase, and attempt to make a citizen's arrest, like the series of events that led to the death of Ahmaud Arbery. On February 23rd, 2020, Ahmaud Arbery was just living his life. He was taking a run through a coastal residential neighborhood where his mother lived in Glenn County. I read that Ahmaud Arbery, who was a former standout football player in high school, liked to take runs. He liked to take the runs to clear his mind. Many of us in this noble chamber may sometimes just need to take a break, step back, and clear our minds after a long day, similar to the long day we're going to have today. You may want to take a morning workout to clear your mind. You may want to take an afternoon walk to clear your mind. You may want to just read a book after a long day of work to clear your mind. But Ahmaud Arbery liked to run to clear his mind. Now, on February the 23rd, 2020, Ahmaud Arbery's peaceful run was disrupted. And Mr. Ahmaud Arbery ultimately ended that run when his life was lost by the barrel of a shotgun. Those two shotgun blasts to the chest of Ahmaud Arbery was the end result of two men who jumped in their trucks to take the law in their own hands. This after the father and this father-son duo called 911, not once, Dean, but twice, to report that they thought a crime was being committed by Mr. Arbery in their neighborhood. The man told the 911 operator that it was a black man in shorts and a white t-shirt running through my neighborhood. Mr. Ahmaud Arbery had committed no crimes as the man made the 911 call. Now, it was later discovered when they directly spoke to the property owner that his home was not the subject of any burglaries. No property was ever stolen from his property. No property was damaged on his property. So why? Why? Why was Ahmaud Arbery shot and killed on February the 23rd, 2020? It was because two men that chased Mr. Arbery felt empowered by the citizen's arrest statute here in the state of Georgia. Just imagine what went through Ahmaud Arbery's mind after being chased for 4 minutes by not one, but two trucks. One truck in front of him, blocking his pathway, and one truck behind him, blocking his retreat. All the men in those trucks were armed. Ahmaud Arbery was trapped. Where could he go? Ultimately, Ahmaud Arbery was shot twice and stumbled to the ground. Ahmaud Arbery was 25 years old. Yesterday I was thinking about what would I say when I came to the well. How could I describe his last moments on earth in preparation to support this bill, HB 479? And then I thought about my college days at Valdosta State University in the late 90s. I enjoyed my time at Valdosta. I loved living in South Georgia. Other than family trips out of state, that was my first time being outside the metro area. I met friends and classmates from Thomasville, Nashville, Waycross, Macon, Adel, Rennes, and Moultrie, Georgia, just to name a few. During my summer semester of my junior year at VSU, I wanted to take up running, to stay in shape, to enjoy the beautiful residential neighborhood outside of my apartment complex. I did that to clear my mind after long days in class. Then it hit me. I was a black man running with a white t-shirt and shorts in a residential neighborhood in my 20s. And at that moment, I realized I could have been Ahmaud Arbery before Ahmaud Arbery. I yield the well, Mr. Speaker.
The time for debate has expired. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of House Bill 479 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machine. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? Have all the members in the gallery made it back and voted? Have all members now voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine. On the passage of House Bill 479, the ayes are 173. The nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Chair recognizes the chairman of the House Rules Committee for an announcement.
House Rules Committee will meet at 6:45. Thank you.
The chair is advised that there's dinner downstairs. We're going to break for dinner until 7 p.m. 7 p.m.